Welcome to Warblog. This is a development video, um, just to point out a new part of the rules. So essentially, under depression, we've got a new set of rules as detailed below. Maybe I should put some spaces in there. 1 minute. Yeah, so we'll put some spaces in. So this is actually a very significant and drastic change to the depression rules, and so I don't know how well it's going to play. Essentially, you can recover in the same way that you would recover before, but the step change has changed, because the way it worked before is you could only recover to 2 or below your maximum. So if you were to have received 8 depression factors, you could never go below 6. That would be your maximum. But I think that on reflection, it's something that's been bugging me for a while, but I never really knew the solution, and I'm still not sure that this is the right way of doing it, but I suspect that it is. I'm just trying to sort of contemplate the impact on gameplay that it's going to have, because it's going to have absolute impact. Change that a minute. It's going to have a massive impact on every game completely. But I think the point that I'm trying to get to with this is that what I want to be able to achieve is for the players to be able to withdraw units and to regroup them. So by pulling them away from the front line where they're not going to be attacked, it allows the player to regroup them and actually return them into battle with greater effect. I think, for example, if a unit got 10 depressions, the maximum they could ever recover would be to 8. They're still quite useless. You know, the difference between 10 and 8 is not really that relevant. But I think that with this, if you were to get to 10, it'd actually be worth recovering back down to 4. Obviously, it would actually take 6 turns. So that's no small feat. So I don't think it's going to sway the balance. It's not as though you can remove them and have them come back fresh as life. Fresh as new again, and it's not without cost. But I think, you know, for example, anything that is below 4 can recover to full strength, and I think that's quite significant. I'm sort of tempted to make it 3, but it's such a tight balance that it seems difficult to comprehend the implications of, you know, in the subtle senses. I mean, for example, if I had 3.5 depression, I would be able to recover fully, and that would be quite a lot of units, really. So what I'm going to just do is have a little blast on, not this game, because I'm sort of a bit happy with that game. I've been trying with some of these other ones that I've been playing. I think I've tried this one. Let me have a look at this one, because this is an old game. I'm not really likely to play it again. I wonder if I don't think I have adjusted this. So he's at depression 1. He's at depression 1. Now he's at depression 4.15. So he would only be able to recover to depression 1. He's at depression 8. So he would only be able to recover to 3. So he is at, so we've got this guy here at 8, so he will only be able to recover to 3. And he would only be able to recover to 1. He'd be able to fully recover. So what have we got? He'll be able to recover to 3, 1, 0, 1. So we'll end up with 3, 0, 1, 1. 3, 1, 1, 0. 3, 1, 1, 0. But it's going to take us a few turns. So let's do a end turn. They should have actually gone through the first step. No. Okay, so they've gone down. Let's just see how far we can take this down. So it's 2 turns. So it's 3 turns. He's now down to 1.6. Is 0. 1.125. 5.1. So one more turn. He's down to 1, which is his maximum. He's down to 0. He's down to 1. And he's down to 4. So he's got a couple more turns, but he should actually only be able to go down to 3. So if we... So essentially, based on his maximum, he can never go below 1 now, because he's been at that level. He's recovered fully. He's at 1. And he's still on the road to recovery, but he won't be able to get below 3. So this will be the telling turn. So his maximum recovery is 1. His maximum recovery is down to 0. He's at 1, and he's gone down to 3. If we do one more turn of that, essentially going through the recovery process, what we should find is that they're all haven't changed. 1, 0, 1, 3. Now you can't. I think you can't actually see that actually. So just to sort of reiterate, top one is now at 3. The one below it is at 1. The one below that is at 0. The one below that is 1. It's actually one of these changes that I feel quite confident in the maths of, because it's just a small little place in the code where it does that. It did startle me at first because the elements where the depressions go down are all over the place, and it would have taken ages to do that. But the recovery code is actually separate, takes place, and I don't even know when really, but a particular part of the turn, and it's just a couple of lines of code that were in there, so I've just been able to adjust those, and I think that they're working. And so what that allows us to do is to sort of essentially to regroup, and I think that concept of regrouping brings in a greater degree of maturity, which is what I always want to see in this game. Not so much in realism, because I don't chase realism, but a sense of playing in the way that you feel that maybe it should work, in that you have the ability to regroup, and that ability to regroup will provide you with a slightly more substantial force than you might otherwise have had under the previous rules, because you could regroup, but because you could never get the unit that was at 10 to below 8, it was almost hardly worth it. But in this instance, we brought him back down because he was over 8. We brought him back down, this guy here. Obviously, it doesn't really matter. We brought him back down to 3, and that's actually quite a reasonable fighting force. It's still not uninjured, but it's still sort of fairly significant as a loss, and 4 would be even greater, which is nearly 50%. I think it means that you can do that sort of pulling back, and I think that's key to sort of understanding how a lot of things work. I mentioned before in the video that sort of prompted me to do this change, of how things worked in Korea, around the river Kwam, I think, with the chicks and the all the US companies that were defending that line. They were essentially in many cases decimated, 90% of their units sort of decimated, but they were still able to regroup with much reduced numbers and reform with other elements, and bit by bit they were still actually there. I'm not saying that I want them to be invincible, but I think there's a certain degree of, it's not a case of a unit, say, getting all their people back, because organisations at that level are quite dynamic. So what they were doing, they're actually adding up the units. So if this was a unit, it had a say designation Company A of certain regiment. If they were to retreat and fall back, okay, they might have lost 90%, but what they were doing was they were getting all their administration staff, from the offices, giving them guns. The clerks in the supply units were being given guns, and they were bolstering them up with these people. They were bringing in locals, and they were just, it wasn't just resurrecting the dead. It was more, to some extent, reorganizing units near the front line in real time, so to speak. And so I think that this is going to change a little bit. I think it's going to change the sensibilities of it, because I still think that people are going to sort of want to sort of just push units, in sort of football boy sense, towards the front line and just keep attacking. But I think that it'll offer the scope for doing things like that, for having, say, rolling lines of defense. You can have front lines, for example. In this, we could have this, and as soon as they become weak, they fall back and they hold here. By the time you get there, they've recovered, and then these units that have been beaten would fall back to there, where they would recover, gain some strength. And I think that the speed of recovery is such that it's not going to be sort of something, it's like a magic potion. You get these games and they say, oh, I'll give them a magic potion. Well, you've got certain points, and all of a sudden you can take your decimated unit and get him up to full strength by giving him some points. And I dislike that sort of stuff, because it just doesn't make any sense. And I think the subtlety is significant enough that it's not going to be overwhelming or overbalanced in any regards. So I think that's sort of quite a significant and reasonable change, really. I think the only thing that I might I don't want to sort of jump to any conclusions, because I'm still trying to sort of think about it. But I sort of thinking, well, maybe there should be some exceptions to those rules. For example, maybe irregulars can't do that. Maybe for irregulars, their limits are reduced, so they fall back, but they can't regain to as much. Maybe putting on it for irregulars a +1. Having sort of the recovery rates for certain units different to represent certain facets of how they operate, etc. But anyway, I mean, I think that in many games, in many of the scenarios, there's so many units that it doesn't really bring out sort of a simulated model of how things actually are, and that's always quite intentional. It's not supposed to be realistic. Everything is supposed to be abstract, and so the abstract things have to represent abstract definitions of reality, of the simulation, without it being such sort of a tight simulation. It restricts its sensibilities in how it works. For example, the scales in this game are never consistent. You can have artillery firing apparently from Yeha to Inchincho in this scenario, but if I did a scenario from here and I made it as big as this, they wouldn't be able to do that, and it's sort of like, well, hang on, that doesn't make any sense if you look at one situation to another. But the thing is, it doesn't have to, because it's all sort of abstract. Temporal analysis, I can have some of these scenarios are just 1-day battles and you get 20 turns. Another can be a 2-month battle, and 20 turns is a completely different time scale, but it seems that you're moving less distances or further distances. It's not supposed to make sense like that. I think what you're supposed to be able to do is to be able to apply common sensibilities to the situation, suspending the suspense of disbelief, or maintaining the suspense of disbelief, whichever way around you want to look at it, because it doesn't really make any difference, especially when it is a game and an exercise in mental thinking, so to speak. So anyway, I just wanted to introduce that change. I mean, it is fairly significant. I don't know how much of a sort of an effect or impact it's going to have. But I suspect, to be quite honest, that it is actually quite a dramatic improvement, and I only really thought of it. It's been in the back of my mind for a long time. I'm only really sort of realizing just immediately as I'm doing this video, possibly of the positive impact it's going to have on the game completely, and how maybe restrictive the other approach was. I just hadn't really reflected and considered it too much. So yeah, we'll see how that works out in the long run, and I'll speak to you later. Cheerio.